The night they brought her through the eastern gate. It was raining so hard the iron lanterns above the archway hissed. I stood at the window of the high watch room and watched them come across the courtyard below, 3 of my border guards, their cloaks soaked through, and the woman walking between them with her hands unbound. That was the first thing I noticed. Captain Harwin had orders to bring any suspected courier in chains. She was not in chains. She was walking as though she had decided herself to come. The second thing I noticed was that she was carrying something against her chest, both arms wrapped around it, not in the way a person clutches something precious, but in the way you hold something that is not yours and must be delivered intact. A bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Whatever was inside it, she was keeping it dry even while the rain ran freely down her own face and neck. I turned from the window before she reached the doors. I had a council meeting in 1 hour and a trade dispute with the Western Territories that had been festering for 3 weeks, and I did not have time to personally receive every suspicious figure Harwin's men dragged in from the border road. I told myself that, and I went down anyway. She was standing in the entry hall when I came down the stairs. The guards had stepped back to give her space, which was unusual. Harwin's men did not generally give suspected spies space, and she was looking up at the vaulted ceiling with an expression I could not immediately name. Not awe, not calculation, something quieter than either of those. She was simply looking, the way a person looks at something they have thought about for a long time and are now finally seeing in the flesh. My wolf, who had been silent since my father's death 3 months ago, silent in the way a deep river goes silent before a dam breaks, went completely, profoundly still. I stopped on the last step. She did not notice me for a moment. Then she did, and she turned, and the expression on her face shifted to something measured and composed. She was perhaps 5 or 6 years younger than I was. Her hair was dark and pressed against her jaw by the rain. Her hands, when she lowered the oilcloth bundle carefully to her side, were calloused in an unusual way, not the calluses of a fighter or a field laborer, but something finer. Small parallel grooves across the pads of her fingers. I had seen that before once in my grandmother's library in an old portrait. "Alpha King Edric," she said. Her voice was clear and unhurried. "I was told to give this to no one but you." She held out the bundle. I did not take it yet. "Who told you that?" I said. "A man named Cavil. He found me on the road outside Morthen 3 days ago and said he had a commission for a healer's courier. He told me what to carry and where to go and that I should speak only to you." She paused. "He did not tell me he was dead before I left Morthend. I found that out myself on the 2nd day when I passed a village where they were posting the news. I almost turned back." "Why didn't you?" She looked at the bundle in her hands. "Because I don't know what's inside it, and I don't like the idea of an unknown thing being left undelivered on a road." It was not the answer of a spy. It was not the answer of a liar. It was, I thought, the answer of someone who was telling the truth precisely, because she saw no reason not to, which was its own kind of wariness, because a person with no reason to lie is often in a situation worse than a liar's. I came down the last step and took the bundle from her. It was heavier than it looked. "What is your name?" "Saren, I am from Hulwick. My mother was a healer there." "Was? She died last winter." I looked at her hands again, the calloused grooves. In my grandmother's portrait, the woman depicted had the same marks. A woman who had spent years grinding and pressing dried herbs, rolling and preparing compounds, pressing plant matter through fine cloth. A healer's hands. My wolf did not move. He only waited, and his waiting was the most focused thing in me. "Harwin," I said, "give her a room in the east wing, not the cells." The captain blinked. "My lord, the council's directive." She brought what she was sent to bring. She came in without being taken. She has calloused hands and a mother in the ground. I looked back at Saren, who had gone very still. She is a healer's daughter on an errand. Put her somewhere dry and have someone bring her food. I left before anyone could argue, the bundle under my arm, my wolf turning slow circles inside my chest like something trying to find a comfortable place to rest. The bundle contained a letter and a glass vial sealed with green wax, and a folded piece of old parchment that I did not touch until I had read the letter twice. Cavil had been, apparently, a traveling physician of the old school, the kind who kept records the way other men kept money, in tight, coded script, because information was his currency, and he trusted no one entirely. The letter was addressed to me in formal language that suggested he had known of Valdenmere and its bloodline for some time. He wrote that the vial contained a compound he had prepared from a formula that belonged originally to the healers of the Selwick line, a line my grandmother had spoken of, once in a context I had forgotten until this moment. The old healer families. The ones who had worked alongside the Wolfpack kingdoms in the old age, who carried in their blood a secondary mark, not the wolf bond, but a gentler thing, a harmonic, that allowed them to be recognized by the old archive seals. I set the letter down and looked at the folded parchment for a long time. Then I locked both the letter and the parchment in my desk and went to find my head archivist. Brother Owen was 83 years old and had the particular energy of a man who had outlived every ambition except the keeping of records. He listened to what I told him, not everything, only that a courier had arrived with materials that referenced the old healer families, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "There is a seal in the lower archive that has not been active since your grandmother's time. I have checked it every decade as the records require. It has never responded to me or to any other archivist." "What does it respond to?" I said. "In principle," he looked at me over his spectacles, "the presence of someone carrying the old harmonic, the Selwick line, or any of the 6 old healer families, but they are gone, my lord. There has been no documented sighting of anyone from those families in 40 years. 42 years, I said, because I had just read the parchment's date in my head. "Show me the seal." He showed me. It was in the deepest part of the archive, behind 2 locked doors and a passage so narrow a broad-shouldered man had to turn sideways. The seal itself was set into the stone wall at chest height, a disc of iron the size of a large hand, etched with the same interlocking pattern I had seen on the seal of my grandmother's personal effects, dark and cold and completely inert. I put my palm to it, nothing. I already knew it would not respond to me. I was wolf-born, not healer-born. I was not what the seal was looking for. I went back upstairs and stood outside the door of the East Wing room where Harwin's men had put Saren, and I stood there for 3 full minutes arguing with myself before I knocked. She opened the door in clean, dry clothes. Someone had brought her something from the servants' stores. And she had her hair loose and her feet bare, and she was holding a cup of tea in both hands, and she looked at me with a kind of patient wariness that suggested she had been expecting this knock, only not quite so soon. "I would like to show you something," I said. "It will require going back down into the cold. I am sorry about that." She looked at her tea, she looked at me. "Is it something that matters?" she said. "I think it might be the most important thing in this castle," I said. "I don't know yet." She set the tea down on the table inside the door. "Then yes," she said. She did not ask questions on the way down. She walked beside me, not behind me, as a prisoner or a supplicant would, and she observed things. The tapestries, the arrangement of the lanterns, the stonework at the joints between old sections and new. She had the manner of someone who is accustomed to entering unfamiliar spaces and reading them quickly, the way a healer enters a sick room and begins assessing before anyone has said a word. My wolf had not settled. He was still waiting, precisely and completely, in the way he had waited for nothing since my father was alive. I did not know what to do with that. I was not accustomed to not knowing what to do. Brother Owen was waiting at the first locked door. He looked at Saren with the careful interest of a very old man who has lived long enough to recognize things that are out of the ordinary, without immediately deciding what to think of them. "This is Saren," I said. "From Halwick, her mother was a healer." Owen looked at her hands, then he looked at me. Then he opened the door without a word. The narrow passage was colder than I remembered. Saren did not shiver. She tucked her hands into the long sleeves of the borrowed tunic and kept pace with me, and when we came out into the small chamber where the seal sat in the wall, she stopped. She looked at it for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable in the way that a very still surface of water is unreadable, not because there is nothing beneath it, but because the stillness is doing work. "I don't know what this is," she said. "I know," I said. "I am not asking you to know. I am asking you to put your hand against it." She turned and looked at me. "Why?" I told her the truth. "Because a man named Cavell sent you here with a letter that mentions the healer bloodlines, and because your hands look like your mother spent years teaching you her trade, and because the seal in that wall has not moved in 42 years, and I want to know if it moves for you." She was quiet for a moment, "And if it does?" Then we will have a great deal to talk about, I said. And if it doesn't, I will personally apologize for dragging you back down into the cold, and I will see to it that you are given a horse and an escort to wherever you are going. She considered this. Then she walked to the wall and placed her palm flat against the iron disc. The light came immediately, not blazing, not violent, but the way a fire answers a bellows, a deep amber brightness from within the iron itself, spreading outward from the point of contact between her skin and the seal's surface, filling the etched channels of the pattern until the whole disc was lit. The light was warm and steady. It did not pulse or flicker. It simply was as though it had been waiting for exactly this and found no need to make a performance of it. Saren made a small sound, not fear. Something between surprise and recognition. The sound a person makes when something clicks into place that they did not know had been unmoored. Brother Owen made no sound at all. He sat down on the stone bench along the wall and put his face in his hands. My wolf broke open inside my chest like a dam releasing, not violent, not overwhelming, but vast and warm and certain in a way I had not felt since my father died, since I had taken the chain of office and felt it settle on my shoulders with the full weight of everything unfinished. The bond did not hit me like a blade or a shout. It came the way dawn comes, slow and then all at once, the light already everywhere before you realize the night is gone. I stood very still and breathed. Saren took her hand from the seal. The light dimmed but did not go out. It settled to a low, steady warmth in the pattern's deepest channels, the same amber as a banked hearth. She looked at her palm. "What is this?" she said quietly. "An old promise," I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved. "Made before either of us was born." I did not tell my counsel that night. I needed 3 things first: to read the parchment fully, to speak with Owen, and to speak more with Saren herself, not as a king conducting an inquiry, but as a man trying to understand what had just occurred to him in a basement room in the presence of an iron seal and a woman who was still looking at her own hand. She was remarkably composed, for someone whose world had just shifted. I had expected questions, or fear, or the kind of brittle brightness people produce when they are overwhelmed and trying not to show it. What I got instead was a long silence, and then, "Can you explain to me what the seal is and what it is supposed to mean? I would like to understand before I decide how I feel about any of it." I could not help it. I laughed quietly in the back of my throat, and she looked at me with a small frown that was not quite displeasure. "I am sorry," I said. "I was not expecting that question." "What were you expecting?" "I don't know, shock perhaps demands." "I will make demands once I understand the situation," she said, perfectly seriously. "It seems inefficient to make them before." So I explained. We were sitting in the archive itself by then, in the upper reading room, with a fire going and 2 cups of something warm that Owen had produced from somewhere. And I explained what I knew of the old healer families, the Selwick line, and the 5 others, who had lived alongside the wolf-pack kingdoms in the centuries before the consolidation, who had kept the medicinal and magical knowledge that the wolf-born could not carry themselves, who had been bound to the kingdoms not by fealty or by contract, but by something older than either of those things. A harmonic, the old texts called it, a resonance between the healer bloodline and the wolf bond. Not a mate bond, exactly, or not only that, but a specific, documented, historically attested connection between a healer-born person and the alpha of a wolf kingdom, recognized by the old seals that had been built into the archive walls of every great wolf kingdom for this exact purpose. The seals were built so that if a healer-born ever came to the kingdom, I said, even centuries later, even if they didn't know what they carried, the kingdom would know them. Saren was quiet for a moment, turning her cup in her hands. "My mother never told me any of this. She may not have known. The Selwick line scattered generations ago. Some of them survived, clearly, your grandmother, your mother, you, but the knowledge of what they carried would have been lost along the way. What remained was the bloodline and the trade, the healing work. And the calluses," she said, looking at her hands. "And the calluses," I agreed. She was quiet again. The fire settled and threw new light across her face. I was looking at her, I realized, had been looking at her in the close, attentive way that my wolf had been looking at her since the entry hall, not because I had decided to, but because it was happening the same way breathing happens, without decision, as a function of being alive. I looked away, into the fire. I was a king with a council meeting in the morning, and a trade dispute that still needed resolving, and a dead physician's letter in my locked desk, and a woman sitting across from me who carried in her blood something the kingdom had been waiting 42 years for, and who was now asking practical questions about it in a measured voice. And I did not know what to do with any of it except begin with what was directly in front of me. "The seal responding to you does not obligate you to anything," I said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever the old bond means, whatever the harmonic means, you are not a prisoner here, and you are not required to stay. I would ask only that you allow me a few days to read what Cavell sent fully, and to let Owen examine the old records, so that I can give you a complete account. After that, you choose." She looked at me. It was a careful look, the kind that is reading rather than staring. "Why are you telling me I can leave?" she said. "Most men in your position would simply not mention the option. Most men in my position are not trying to understand what an old harmonic means for two people who had never met before tonight," I said. "It seems unwise to begin with deception." Another pause. "All right," she said. "I will stay a few days." The days were 3 before my counsel forced the issue, and in those 3 days I learned more about Saren of Holwick than I had learned about any person in recent memory, because she was the kind of person who answers questions directly and asks them with the same directness, and conversations with her moved quickly, without the social maneuvering that most conversations at court required. Her mother had been a healer of the practical kind, plants and compounds, and the setting of bones and the treatment of infections. She had died of a fever in January, alone, because the village could not afford the medicines she had spent her life preparing for others. Saren had spent the following month selling what remained of the shop's stock to settle her mother's debts, and then she had started walking, doing courier and errand work wherever she could find it, because that was what was available and she had no reason to stay in Holwick and no clear sense of where to go. She said all of this without self-pity, in the same tone she might use to describe the weather, which I found both admirable and faintly worrying. She had been sleeping in inns, and occasionally in barns for 2 months when Cavell found her on the Morthend Road. In those 3 days she also, without being asked, and apparently without thinking much about it, spent time in my stables. I discovered this on the second morning when I went looking for her after breakfast and Harwin told me she had gone down to the yard. I found her in the far stall, where we kept an old werewolf who had been with my father for 12 years and who had refused, since my father's death, to eat properly or allow anyone to approach him. He was lying down. She was sitting on a hay bale at the far wall, not close to him, not touching him, just present, and she was talking to him, quietly in the low, steady murmur that healers use, that tells a sick thing that it is not alone. The old wolf had his eyes open and was watching her. I stood in the stable doorway for a while. My chest ached, and it was not grief, or not only grief. It was the ache of something long needed being supplied, of a tension releasing that you had grown so accustomed to you had forgotten it was there. She looked up and saw me. She did not stop talking for a moment. She finished her sentence to the wolf and then said to me, "He has not eaten because he is grieving. You know that, I expect." "I know it," I said. "He might eat if someone comes back tomorrow, and the day after. It takes time." "Will you," I said, "come back tomorrow?" She looked at the wolf. "Yes," she said. "I said I would stay a few days." She came back the next morning without being asked, and the morning after that. On the 3rd morning, the old werewolf ate from her hand. My counsel found out about the seal on the morning of the 4th day. I had meant to tell them myself, in my own time, after I had read all of Owen's records and formed a clear account. What happened instead was that 2 of the junior archivists talked, as junior archivists always do, and by the time I sat down for the morning meeting, my counsel already knew that an unknown woman had been housed in the East Wing, that she had activated the old healer seal in the lower archive, and that she was spending her mornings in the stables with the Alpha's grieving wolf. The resulting conversation was the kind I disliked most, not hostile exactly, but driven by fear dressed as reason. Lord Caston, who handled diplomatic affairs and was therefore professionally suspicious of everyone who arrived unexpectedly, argued that the woman was a plant, that Cavell's death and his letter, and the woman herself constituted an elaborate mechanism designed to introduce someone into the castle under the cover of an old legend. Lord Prewett, who handled internal security, agreed. The two of them had apparently been discussing it for some time before the meeting began, because their arguments were too neat, too well-rehearsed. I let them make their arguments. I had learned from my father that a council becomes manageable the moment you stop trying to prevent it from speaking and start listening for the specific shape of its fear. When they finished, I said, "The seal responded to her." "The seal could have been tampered with," Caston said. "Owen has kept that seal for 40 years, I said. "It has not been tampered with, you know Owen." A pause. They knew Owen. "The seal responding to her does not tell us her intentions," Pruett said. "No," I agreed. "It tells us her bloodline, her intentions I have been assessing for 3 days in person, in conversation, in practice. She healed my father's wolf. She brought the bundle to me rather than opening it. She told me immediately that Cavil was dead. She stayed when I told her she could leave." I looked around the table. "She did not come here to deceive us. She came because she was given a job, and she is a person who completes what she undertakes." "You are certain of this?" Caston said. "I am," I said, "and I will tell you something else. The harmonic the seal recognized in her bloodline is not a coincidence or a manipulation. The records Owen has been reviewing since the night she arrived confirm that the Selwick line did not die out, it scattered. She is the last documented female descendant in a direct line from the Selwick healers who worked with this kingdom in my grandfather's grandfather's time. The seal was placed in that wall to know her if she ever came. It knew her." Silence around the table. The particular silence of men who have argued themselves into a position and are now looking for a graceful way out of it. "What are you proposing?" Lord Caston said finally. "I am proposing that she be recognized for what she is," I said. "The healer-born of the Selwick line arrived at Valdenmere in the way the archive records said a healer-born might arrive, by the road, unexpectedly carrying something that needed to be delivered." I paused. "I am also proposing that she be given a place here. The choice will be hers, but the recognition will be ours, and it will be public, and it will be made before this council adjourns today." Pruett opened his mouth. I looked at him, and he closed it again. "Is there an objection that is not already covered by the seal's recognition and 3 days of direct observation?" I said. There was not. There was a silence, and then Lord Caston said, "No, my lord," and Lord Pruett nodded, and the rest of the table followed, and that was the end of the discussion. I went to find Saren afterward. She was in the stables again, not with the old werewolf this time, but simply sitting in the open doorway on the stone sill, looking out at the training yard, watching the younger wolves run their morning drills. She had a piece of dried herb in her fingers, something from the pouch she kept at her belt, and she was turning it idly. I sat beside her on the sill. There was barely room for both of us, but she moved slightly to make space without comment. "My council knows about the seal," I said. "I thought they might," she said. "People talk. I have told them what I believe about your bloodline and your intentions. I want to tell you what I have decided, and then I want you to tell me what you decide, because the second thing depends entirely on the first." She turned the herb over in her fingers. "All right. I am going to recognize you in the Great Hall this afternoon," I said, "in front of the full court, as the healer-born of the Selwick line arrived at Valdenmere. That recognition belongs to the kingdom, and to you, it is what the seal is for, and it will happen regardless of your choice about the rest." "The rest," she said. "The bond," I said, "the harmonic. What the records call a mate bond specific to the healer bloodline and the alpha of a wolf kingdom. I will not call it by a word you haven't agreed to, but I will not pretend it isn't there either. I felt it when you walked through the gate. I felt it when the seal lit. I have felt it every morning you've come to the stables. My wolf has been more himself in the 3 days since you arrived than in the 3 months since my father died. I am telling you this clearly because I think you deserve a clear account, and I think you are capable of receiving one." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the training yard. The wolves were running a long circuit, their breath visible in the cold morning air. "I felt it too," she said. "I didn't know what it was the first night. I thought it was exhaustion or the strangeness of the place." She paused. "Then this morning I realized I had stopped thinking about leaving." Something tightened in my chest and then released, the way a held breath releases. "I'm not asking you to decide anything now," I said. "I'm asking you to stand beside me in the Great Hall this afternoon so the kingdom can know what the seal already knows. The rest, all of it, at your pace, at your discretion, entirely your choice." She turned and looked at me. She had a way of looking directly at a person that most people found disconcerting. I had found over 3 days that I preferred it to every other kind of look. "You're very careful," she said, "about making sure I have options." "It seems important," I said. "It is," she agreed. And then, more quietly, "It's also not something I'm accustomed to." I thought about her mother's shop, sold piece by piece to settle debts. I thought about the road outside Morthend and the dead man's commission, and the oilcloth bundle kept dry in the rain while she herself got soaked. I thought about what it would mean to have been moving for months with no clear destination, doing whatever work appeared, with no one in particular looking for you. "I know," I said. "I intend to change that." A pause. She looked back at the yard. One of the younger wolves had broken from the pack circuit and was trotting directly toward the stable doorway. A young female, brown and fast, who had been watching Saren with undisguised interest all morning. She came right up to the sill, sniffed Saren's knee, and then sat down in front of her with the decisive air of an animal that has made up its mind. Saren looked down at her. "Hello," she said. She put her hand out, palm up. The young wolf put her chin on it. My own wolf exhaled, the first full exhale in 3 months, and was at peace. The great hall that afternoon was full, not because I had summoned anyone specifically, but because word had gotten through the castle the way word always does. And by the time the court assembled, there were wolves and men, and the full council and the kitchen staff pressed into the back behind the columns, and a quietness that was itself a kind of attention. I stood at the front of the hall. Saren stood beside me, in a borrowed gown, deep green, which Brother Owen had produced from somewhere with the matter-of-fact resourcefulness of a man who had been preparing for this for 42 years. And she was composed in the way I had come to recognize as her particular version of it. Not stiff, not performing, but settled, as though she had decided before she walked in what she thought of the situation, and was now simply present in it. I did not make a long speech. I did not need to. I named the Selwick line. I named the seal. I stated, in the flat declarative register of a king making a formal record, that the woman beside me had been recognized by Valdenmir's oldest archive seal as the last of the Selwick Healer-born, arrived on the road as the old records said she might arrive, carrying what was sent to her and asking no reward for the delivery of it. I stated that she was to be given the healer's rooms in the East Tower, and that the Selwick sigil, the 3-leaf mark, which I had found in Owen's records that morning, pressed in old ink, was to be restored to Valdenmir's formal record of distinguished lines. Then I turned to her. I had not told her I was going to do this next part. I had not planned it myself, exactly. It had arrived in me somewhere between the stables and the hall as the thing that was true, and therefore the thing that needed to be said. "Saren of Halwick," I said, "the bond my wolf has named since the night you arrived is not a ceremony or an obligation. It is a recognition, the same kind the seal made, but older than iron and older than records, and it names you as mine and me as yours by something that neither of us chose and both of us felt." I held out my hand. "You told me this morning you had stopped thinking about leaving. I'm asking you now in front of this hall if you will stay." She looked at my hand, she looked at me. The hall was perfectly, wholly silent. "Yes," she said, and she put her hand in mine. The young brown wolf from the stables, who had apparently followed us in and was sitting at the back of the hall, which no one had thought to prevent, let out a single sharp sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a howl, and the wolves in the hall answered, and then the men, and then the hall was not silent at all. Lord Caston was in the front row. He had the expression of a man who has been wrong about something and is still deciding how much to mind it. He bowed in the precise, formal way that protocol required when a king acknowledged a mate. Lord Prewett beside him followed a half-second later. The rest of the council followed Prewett. And then the hall followed the council, in the wave that moves through a crowd when it has decided together to recognize something it was not certain of before. Saren's hand was steady in mine. She was looking at the hall with the quiet attention she gave everything, reading it, assessing it, deciding what she thought. I watched the moment she decided. "You planned this part, didn't you?" she said, low enough for only me to hear. "The recognition was planned," I said. "That part," I looked at our hands. "The rest of it arrived while I was walking here." "The part where you told the entire hall you were mine," she said. "I am," I said. It seemed better to say it plainly. She turned and looked at me with the full direct attention that I had in 4 days, come to depend on the way you come to depend on something that tells you the truth about where you stand. "You are very strange," she said, and it was not a complaint. "I've been told," I said. The hall was still moving around us, voices beginning to rise, the stiff ceremony breaking apart into the ordinary noise of a crowd that has witnessed something and is now talking about it. And I kept hold of her hand, and she kept hold of mine, and my wolf was warm and quiet and entirely, finally, at rest. The healers' rooms in the East Tower had been empty since my grandmother's time. They needed cleaning and new linens and a fire lit, and a good deal of sorting through what had been stored there in the interim. Saren threw herself into it with the practical energy of someone who has been doing things for herself for a long time and is not waiting for anyone's help. I found her there on the 5th evening, standing on a stool to reach the high shelf, pulling down boxes and handing them to one of the young house wolves who had decided to assist her. She had ink on her fingers. She had been cataloging what she found as she went, and her hair was coming loose, and there was a smear of dust on her jaw, and she looked entirely, completely at home in a way that made the rooms look as though they had been waiting for her, which I supposed they had. She saw me in the doorway. "There is a box up here that has not been opened in what I estimate is 50 years, she said. "I think it belongs to the archive rather than to me." "I'll have Owen come up," I said. "Good." She handed another box to the young wolf, who trotted off with it. "Also, there is a grinding stone in here that is better than any I have ever used, and I intend to keep it." "The grinding stone is yours," I said. "Everything in those rooms is yours." She came down from the stool and looked at me for a moment. "You say things like that very easily," she said, "as though you've been deciding what belongs to me for some time." "I've been thinking about what should belong to you for 4 days," I admitted. "A grinding stone seems like a reasonable place to start." She looked at the stone on the table. Then she looked at the rooms, the high windows, the shelves, the old herb chart on the wall, the window seat where someone had once sat in the morning light and done the careful work of keeping a Wolf Kingdom's people healthy. The place where that work should have continued, unbroken, and did not, and now would again. "My mother would have liked it here," she said quietly. "I believe your mother's grandmother did like it here," I said. "There are records. Owen has been finding them." She was quiet for a moment, and I knew better than to fill the quiet. "Then it was always going to be somewhere like this," she said at last, "for someone like me. Just not for me until it was." I crossed the room and stood beside her, and we looked at the rooms together, the amber light of the evening fire, the dried herbs someone had tied in bundles against the window frame a long time ago, and that were still there, faded and fragrant, the old chart on the wall with its careful botanical illustrations, the deep stone sill where the morning light would come. I did not say anything for a while, and she did not either, and my wolf lay down inside me like a patient animal beside a hearth, warm and settled and without urgency. And I understood, in the slow, clear way that understanding sometimes arrives, not as a revelation but as the simple naming of something already known, that this was what it meant to have found her. Not the ceremony in the hall, not the seal's blaze of amber light, not even the bond itself, felt and named and made public. This, standing here beside her in a room that had been waiting for her. This, the quiet that meant no more waiting. She reached out and straightened the corner of the old herb chart on the wall, which had been slightly crooked. A small, particular, proprietary gesture, the gesture of someone arranging their own house. "Tomorrow," she said, "I am going to begin an inventory of what the kingdom has and what it needs. Medicinally, I expect the list of what it needs will be substantial." "I expect so," I said. "I will need access to the archive's old records. And someone who knows the territory, which plants grow where, which villages have the most illness, which seasons are hardest." "I know a good deal of that myself," I said. "I can show you." She turned and looked at me with the expression that meant she was deciding whether I had meant something beyond what I had said. I waited. "Then we will start there," she said. And the way she said it, simply, without ceremony, as the beginning of a practical plan that was also understood by both of them without needing to be stated, the beginning of everything else, was worth more to me than any vow spoken in a great hall before a bowing crowd. Cavil had been dead before she left Morthend. He had sent her to deliver something he never lived to explain, to a king he had apparently trusted to understand it. I did not know if he had known what she was, or only guessed, or only hoped. I did not know, and likely would never know, whether it was fate or luck or the old harmonic drawing her down the road toward the gate where my wolf went still the moment she walked under the arch. What I knew was this. A woman arrived on a rainy night carrying something that needed to be delivered intact, and she delivered it, and she told the truth about everything, and she healed my father's wolf and cataloged the East Tower rooms and asked practical questions about an ancient bloodline before she decided how she felt about it. And somewhere in the course of those days, the hollow where my father's death had left me began, quietly and without announcement, to be filled. The grinding stone was still on the table. Tomorrow she would begin the inventory. I would walk the territory with her in the coming weeks, through the early winter cold, showing her what I knew of the land and its people, and she would bring to it what she knew, which was different from anything I had, and necessary, and exactly what the kingdom needed. And what I had not known I was waiting for until the night she walked in out of the rain with her arms around a bundle of oilcloth, keeping something she didn't understand dry because she had been asked to deliver it, and she was a person who does what she is asked to do. That, I thought, was who she was, and I was glad, more than glad, with a quiet gladness that had no performance in it, that she was mine, and that I was hers, and that the road had brought her here.